Joining me now, Wall Street Journal chief economics reporter Nick Timiraos, MSNBC political analyst and former Republican congressman from Florida, Carlos Curbelo. Here in studio with me, NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Welcome to all. So, Christine, what exactly does this report tell us, and what might it mean for our wallets?
It means this last mile of the inflation fight is bumpy, and you've got inflation back here at 3%. That's not the 2% target the Fed would like to see. It kind of handcuffs the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates anytime soon, and it means we're paying more for things like auto insurance, airfares, fuel oil. I mean, look at the progress, Chris, from the 9% inflation, right? So we've made a lot of progress, but look, the very far right of that chart shows inflation ticking up again. So still hotter than the Fed would like to see and families would like to see.
So how are the markets taking it?
So wobbling in the stock market. And look, what's happening in the markets is they're trying to figure out when, if the Fed will be able to cut interest rates anytime this year. Because when you have inflation that's too hot, you don't want to be cutting interest rates and potentially making it worse. So watching kind of the stock market wobble a little bit. But listen, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty about what the president's policies are going to mean for inflation. When I talk to companies and when you listen to earnings calls, what they talk about is how much more it will cost to make their product or to do their business, not how much less because of the policies on the table right now.
Nick, it caught my eye yesterday when you wrote that not every monthly inflation report is created equal. So talk about why this one matters so much.
Well, Chris, if you think about how businesses operate, a lot of times if they had higher costs in the past year, they change their prices not every month. They might do it at the end of the year. So as we turn into a new year, we've seen the past several years, January tends to have more inflation. And the hope had been that we were finally past all of that. And so as you changed into a new calendar year, you didn't have these big price resets happening this January that you did in 24, that you did in 2023. And the news this morning was just not good. It shows that there are still inflationary pressures in the system. And so that just is going to make it harder to get on top of this.
Christine touched on this, Nick, but what does this all signal to the Federal Reserve?
Well, she's right. It's going to keep the Fed on hold here, and Donald Trump may not be happy about that. He tweeted this morning that he wanted to see interest rates come down. I think this is a reminder of how different the economy that he inherited this time is from the economy he inherited 8 years ago when inflation was very low, and it made it easier to push for lower interest rates. It made it easier to do things like imposing tariffs that push up the price of imported goods. This time around, you know, we're talking about more tariffs. We're talking about larger tariff hikes, and you're doing it in an economy that has higher inflation and where businesses have the experience of being able to push along price increases to their customers that they did not have 8 years ago.
I want to go back to tariffs in a minute, but Congressman, let's remember how easy Donald Trump said it would be for him. But prices rose a lot for eggs, 15.2% from December to January. That's the largest increase since June of 2015. Our NBC local team in L.A. is reporting that some Californians are actually turning to local farms to get eggs. Look at this long line of cars in Chino. They're snaking around the block just to try to find some eggs. I guess the key political question here is how long are people willing to wait for something that they were promised would happen on day one, which was 23 days ago?
That's right, Chris. And of course, the egg situation is exacerbated by the bird flu and all the chickens that have had to have been killed. But at the end of the day, people don't care about those explanations. And we certainly saw that during the Biden administration. President Biden and his team continuously explained to the American people that inflation was better in the United States than the rest of the world, that our economy was stronger than the economies of the rest of the world, that his administration had passed the CHIPS Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. At the end of the day, people were frustrated by high prices, and that's something that now Donald Trump and Republicans are going to have to contend with. When people go to the polls in the fall of next year, this is the biggest question that's going to be on their minds. Did Trump and Republicans actually make inflation better? Did they make life more affordable in the United States? Right now, they're seeing how difficult that is, and these inflationary pressures are aren't allowing interest rates to come down. And of course, that has a big effect on the rest of the economy and on businesses' plans for investment, for job creation. So this is the one issue. There's a lot out there, especially in this early going of the Trump administration, a lot to cover. But this is the one issue that politically will matter most.
That brings us back to tariffs, Nick. When Donald Trump said that this was going to be easy, this is a very complicated situation, but talk specifically about tariffs and how that could impact inflation.
Well, tariffs could send prices up. If they don't, the Trump administration argues that they won't send consumer prices up. They could send the dollar up, and what that would mean is that U.S. manufacturers, companies that export, it becomes more expensive for them to do that. It puts them at a little bit of a disadvantage. And, Trump's Treasury Secretary last year warned that tariffs were inflationary. He wrote this in a letter to his investors before he was really in the picture to become the Treasury Secretary. So there is some awareness, I think, inside the Trump administration that they've got different levers to pull here. They will argue that bringing down energy prices, that cutting government spending might help in the other direction. But it's just a more complicated situation right now than when we had tariffs in 2018 and 19.
And it's so interesting, I think, Carlos, that we're seeing pushback on the tariffs from Republicans. Senator Mitch McConnell, he even penned an op-ed writing for his local paper, quote, Kentuckians can't afford the high cost of Trump's tariffs. He even calls tariffs bad policy. He warned it could cost the average Kentuckian $1,200 a year. I wonder if you think the combination of the inflation report, the concern that a lot of Republicans are expressing over tariffs might serve as a warning to Donald Trump.
Well, not only that, Chris, but in the CBS News poll that's been covered this week, most Americans responded that they oppose tariffs against Canada and Mexico. More tolerance for tariffs against China. I think people understand that there's a competition issue there and that the Chinese really don't allow our companies to compete on a level playing field. But when it comes to our neighbors, people don't want those tariffs, and people are making the connection between tariffs and higher prices and inflation. So, yes, I think the Trump administration is going to have to rethink the tariff strategy, especially if inflation remains persistent.